Elon Musk has done it again. This time, he's exposed the corruption of French businessman and vice president of Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton, Bernard Arnault. In an explosive series of tweets, Musk accused Arnault of unethical practices and broken promises. This bombshell came after multiple reports indicated the VP had engaged in shady practices. The allegations have sent shockwaves through the international business community as questions swirl around the true extent of Arnault's wrongdoing. It's not surprising that Musk has taken such a bold stance. His tenacity as an entrepreneur has been well documented over the years. Stick around to see what the billionaire has been accused of, and why Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton has to pay 10 million euros to dispel allegations. Elon Musk has been a beacon of innovation and progress in the world of technology, often pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Recently, he has come under fire from some quarters due to accusations of dishonesty. However, the multifaceted genius is far from taking these claims lying down. Instead, he is using his savvy nature to turn the tables on his accusers. And on the other side of the table is Vice President Bernard Arnault. French business tycoon and businessman Bernard Arnault is perhaps best known as the head of Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton, LVMH, a conglomerate specializing in high-end products. With a net worth of almost $188 billion, he is now among the top tier of the world's wealthiest individuals. Over 30 years ago, he assumed the helm at LVMH, a major player in the production and distribution of luxury fashion labels. But recently, he has been on the receiving end of accusations of corruption. In August, French billionaire Bernard Arnault, owner of the luxury group LVMH, sold his 5.5% share in French retailer Carrefour for around $850 million. According to yearly filings, he controlled majority of those shares through a business based in Luxembourg called Cernivia Europe. Arnault established Cernivia Europe in 2013 and then transferred part of his Carrefour stake to the firm from another Luxembourg entity, Blue Capital SARL, which he had set up to hold his Carrefour shares in 2007 when he first purchased a 9.1% stake. That's not all Arnault has in the tiny European financing hub of Luxembourg, about the same size as Delaware. Beyond his stake in Carrefour, he owns over 24 Luxembourg-based businesses that together had private interest worth $1.6 billion as of December 2020. Among the many advantages, if Arnault liquidates Cernivia Europe, he can keep the proceeds and the cash from selling the Carrefour shares, tax-free. And because of Luxembourg's 100% dividend tax exemption, a break that kicks in if a holding company keeps at least $1.4 million in stock, or 10% of a business's shares for a year, he could have received about $900 million in Carrefour dividends tax-free since 2007. When asked for comments, a representative from Arnault just refused. Even though he is the wealthiest individual who has ever invested via Luxembourg holding companies, he is far from unique in this regard. Luxembourg is favored by billionaires and rich investors for its lightly regulated holding companies, wealth-friendly tax regime, and abundance of tax attorneys, accountants, and advisors, and until 2 years ago, its relative secrecy. Recently, the country's government created a public company register to trace the beneficial ownership of all firms, in accordance with the European Union rule enacted in the aftermath of the Panama Papers probe into hidden offshore riches. Although compliance has not been fully implemented yet, the registry has already exposed the ownership of over 140,000 entities in a nation with a population of just 626,000. Last year, the nonprofit Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, and the French newspaper Le Monde scrapped the registry's website and made the data searchable by an individual's name. Forbes, along with Le Monde and the Open Lux initiative at the OCCRP, combed through the database and discovered that many of the world's richest people, including 2 of the 20 richest, keep billions of dollars in holding companies based in Luxembourg, luxury hotels in the Italian Alps and on St. Bart's in the Caribbean, vineyards in France, boat marinas on the Adriatic coast, and at least $29 billion in publicly traded equities, private firms, and real estate situated on numerous continents are just some of the assets owned by billionaires via these corporations that have not been disclosed. Jan Fitchner, a senior research fellow at the University of Amsterdam who studies offshore financial centers, says, "In Luxembourg, there's this gray zone, where private individuals use companies to store some of their wealth. It has political stability and a very developed legal apparatus. For decades, the wealthy have used tax havens like Luxembourg and South Dakota to hide their true asset holdings from prying eyes. The Luxembourg registry may have changed some of it. At least, that's what many hope." Javier Garcia Bernardo, an assistant professor at Utrecht University and a former data scientist at the nonprofit Tax Justice Network, says, You can have a company in the Netherlands owned by an entity in Luxembourg, owned by an entity in the Cayman Islands, which is owned by a trust in the British Virgin Islands. As you increase the size of the chain, it's basically impossible to know who's investing in this company. These aren't the only shady things going on. Bernard Arnault's Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton has also faced repercussions in the form of penalties. As part of a settlement, LVMH will pay 10 million euros to dispel allegations that a former head of French intelligence spied on its behalf, including on an activist who was making a film about the company's wealthy owner, Bernard Arnault. The settlement, approved on the first Friday of December by a Paris judge, ends multiple criminal investigations linked to the company's employment of Bernard Squarciani, who headed France's domestic intelligence agency. Despite the company's denial of any wrongdoing, the issue has dealt damage to the image of Arnault, who turned LVMH into the largest luxury conglomerate in the world and who now wields considerable power in France. Corruption charges against Squarciani during his time at LVMH were at the heart of the investigations. Court records show that in 2013, he was hired by LVMH's then number 2 executive to advise the company on related issues to crisis management, crisis prevention, and the prevention of counterfeit products and corporate espionage and hacking. But the prosecution claimed that Squarciani engaged in influence peddling, invasion of privacy, and other illegal activities on behalf of LVMH and the Arnault family by using his extensive network of law enforcement, legal, and intelligence connections. Squarciani is alleged to have spied in 2015 on Francois Ruffin, then a documentary maker, but now an elected member of parliament, and infiltrated his advocacy group, Facker, to obtain a copy of the movie. Thanks, boss. That details Arnault's rise to become France's richest man. Separately, in 2013, Squarciani was claimed to have requested private information concerning a court inquiry into LVMH's raid on smaller luxury competitor, Hermes, including the identity of the investigating judge and police evidence. In what was known as the Handbag Wars, Hermes complained to financial prosecutors about LVMH's deceptive practices in acquiring a 20% interest in the company in 2010, without complying with applicable disclosure regulations. Eventually, LVMH settled by paying an €8 million fine. Squarciani and others are still being probed individually for other suspected offenses committed during the time period and might face trial if charges are brought. He has denied the claims in the 16 criminal investigations against him and maintains his innocence. The settlement means LVMH will no longer be at legal risk and will not be indicted for any crimes allegedly linked to Squarciani. Ruffin, who was present in court on Friday, said the luxury group should not have gotten off so lightly. He commented in an interview, "LVMH has already bought and paid for the intelligence services of our country and is now doing the same with the justice system." Later, in front of the judge, he said, "Can justice be bought so cheaply? If the state is going to be paid off, then it should at least be for big bucks to fund our hospitals or schools. This fine amounts to barely 0.02% of LVMH's annual revenue." An official from LVMH testified that the company had internal dysfunctions, but that the company should be allowed to settle and avoid prosecution since it had cooperated with prosecutors and strengthened its compliance and legal departments. The concept of white-collar criminal settlements is still relatively new in France, and some lawyers have criticized it as being too transactional and ineffective to be useful. Known as judicial public interest agreements, they were created under an anti-corruption law known as Sapin II to resolve corruption, embezzlement, or money laundering investigations by encouraging companies to cooperate. Advocates of the system claim that it expedites the settlement of difficult disputes and brings revenue to state coffers. One thing is sure, something shady is unfolding at the top. We may never know what is truly happening behind closed doors, but we can take comfort in knowing that we are aware of the potential for something amiss.